I'm the Director of Programs here at ReSource. Real quick, I'm going to do a quick shout out to Kelly Hess here. Kelly just joined us last week as our new Executive Director. So we're super excited to have Kelly here, and we're not going to subject her to coming up here and describing everything that happens here on her fourth day on the job. So you'll get to hear from me instead. So Home Resource is almost people know. Come on in, you're good. Home Resource, people know Home Resource as the store that you can buy cool stuff at, but it's actually a lot more than that in a lot of ways. So big picture, what we're trying to do here as an organization is move away from this take, make, waste kind of economy into a circular economy where materials are getting reused to their highest, next best purpose. Where we also kind of generate an economy and employ people and build skills and support the arts and all those types of things as an organization. So, of course, we've got the store here. Please go shop afterwards. There's that. We also have a lot of other really exciting programs here. You'll see SWAP on the wall. That stands for the Zero Waste Ambassadors Program. Michelle, our Zero Waste Education Manager, goes out to almost every 5th grade class in Missoula County for teaching those 5th graders about the materials economy, and then brings them back here and to do a field trip in this room where they get to see it in action here in the building. We also have a youth internship program managed by my friend Bev there, where we bring youth in from the high school youth who actually get a paid internship and work here building job skills and things like that. We do community workshops with community members coming here to learn skills. Fix-it clinics where people learn how to fix things instead of throwing them away, and a whole lot more. But that's all of this mission of kind of moving towards a more circular economy. And part of what a circular economy is a thriving arts scene and a thriving arts community. So we're really proud to have been able to host Ian for the last, I guess, 6 weeks so far, maybe 7 weeks ago.
I only make it for 3 weeks.
3 weeks? Yeah, okay, yeah. Time has been slow. Yeah. And then having different artists come and get materials here to use in their projects and stuff like that. So it's been a pleasure to host this, and thank you for joining us here. And I think Kelly's next. Sorry about that.
Hi everybody, my name is Kelly Sinner. I'm the program coordinator for Open Air, and I have the pleasure to formally introduce Ian tonight. So, Ian is a non-binary printmaker, textile artist, writer, and vegetable farmer currently based in Missoula, Montana. Occupied Salish, Kootenai, and Kalispel land. Spanning disciplines of printmaking, textiles, and gardening, Ian's work asserts the critical interconnection of human and ecological well-being and argues for the place of gardening and farming within contemporary art practice. Ian received a BFA in Fine Art Studio from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design in 2018. Since graduating, they participated in residency programs such as Caldera Arts in Sisters, Oregon, and exhibited work in numerous group and solo exhibitions. Ian is a recipient of the 2019 Jerome Emerging Fiber Artist Grant through the Textile Center of Minnesota and the 2020 Artist Initiative Grant through the Minnesota State Arts Board. Ian's writing has been published on MnArtists, a platform of the Walker Arts Center, and in the book Slow Spatial Reader, Chronicles of Radical Affection, edited by Carolyn F. Strauss. So, welcome.
My name is Ian. I am a printmaker, textile artist, farmer, and writer, as Kelly mentioned. And thank you for all for doing the introductions, and thank you ReSource for hosting me. It's been a really, really great couple weeks here so far, and I have 1 week left and have a lot I want to do in my last week here. So thank you all for coming out to hear about my work. I have a presentation of some previous projects, and I'm going to move somewhat quickly through that so I can talk more about what I've been working on over the past couple weeks. So I moved to Montana last spring. I started farming up in Moise, Montana, at a vegetable farm there, and then really quickly fell in love with this landscape and the people here, and then moved to Missoula in January. So I'm still really new here, and a big part of why I wanted to do this residency was to feel more grounded in the creative community, and that has absolutely happened right away. ReSource and all of the staff were so welcoming and so helpful. They trained me in on the shop. They're always helping me look for materials. It's just been a really great experience being here, and I'm already feeling so much more plugged into the art scene here and the community, and very, very grateful for that. Okay, so the first project I want to talk about is a body of work I exhibited in 2020 called Medicine Kin. It's a suite of 6 large-scale lino cuts on naturally dyed fabric. I exhibited them at Silverwood Park in 2020, right in the midst of the most restrictive COVID restrictions. So another view of this exhibition. So you might notice that this gallery is a little odd. There's no walls, it's all windows. So I created this big wooden structure to house all of the prints, and they're all in fabric stretched on wooden dowels. And I'm gonna move through and introduce each of the plants that I made portraits of. I like thinking of these pieces as portraits. It's moves from an objective thinking of the plant as a thing, as an object, to thinking of the plant as a person, as being their own sentient being. So this is a portrait of mullein, which grows abundantly here. All of the plants that I chose for this series grow wildly and abundantly in Minnesota, but almost all of them also grow here. So you might recognize some of these plants. And I decided to work with herbal medicine, plant medicine as a subject, because I feel that it's a way to think about our bodies in relationship to the environment, to plants, to other beings, and literally ingest those plants into our body and consume their medicine. And that is just such a potent and powerful way to build relationship and build connection with the natural world. This is a print of burdock, also grows here. So these first 2 plants in the series, you might notice, are introduced plants to this continent. They have not grown here for very long, only a couple hundred years. And I made the intentional decision to include both native and introduced species, because non-native species have so much to offer in terms of medicine and wisdom and healing, and I want to move past an attitude of antagonism towards these plants. And they do wreak havoc, and they are changing our ecosystems, but they're also here to stay. And the fact that they are here is often entangled in histories of immigration, and a lot of plants that we see as noxious or invasive were actually brought here because they have potent food and medicine and are very important to different cultures. This is echinacea. So these are all printed on naturally dyed fabric that I dyed with plants that I either grew or foraged. And that's part of my practice that I'm really excited about, the parts where I am literally going out and harvesting materials or growing materials. That really fits in with the side of my life that is more focused on agriculture. I feel like there's a lot of continuity between those aspects of my life, even though they might seem a little at odds sometimes. moving kind of fast because I'm excited to talk about the new stuff. So I picked these plants not because of their like really specific medicinal qualities, but I picked them because of relationships that I have with them. And stinging nettles is a plant I've worked with and known since I was a little kid. My sisters and I referred to stinging nettle as burning metal when I was a kid, which is, I just think it's so funny. We just like got both words just like a little wrong. And then at some point I learned that their name is actually stinging nettle. But stinging nettle is a medicine plant, a food plant, a fiber plant. I'll show you some work that I've done with the nettle fiber in a couple slides. Stagwort sumac also grows here. Not wildly, I don't think, but you see it around town. And Stagwort sumac was the first plant that I ever dyed with, so DYE. I feel like I need to make that distinction sometimes. So this plant is also a plant that I feel a specific and powerful connection with. And this was also the first plate in the series that I carved. So this series took 2 or 3 years. This was like the longest term project I've ever worked on. And a very big and important part of this project was that I also planted a garden as part of it outside of the exhibition, or outside of the gallery. So I planted this like full brimming medicine garden. There's like 20 different medicinal plants crammed in that little space. And this was in the park outside of the gallery. And since this happened in 2020, the exhibition changed really drastically from what it was supposed to look like. It closed early, the workshops were canceled, the artist talk was virtual, and I really wanted people to be able to interact with these plants, with the medicine. So what I did instead was I dried plants throughout the year, and then I made them into a tea blend. And before I did the virtual artist talk, I had people like give me their addresses, and I sent them a bag of tea, and we all drank tea during the artist talk, which felt it just felt very wholesome and like a way to connect people with the work more deeply than just looking at a screen. And you can see there's this woven structure of the garden. And these are poplar limbs that I harvested from some downed trees on my parents' property. Some images of Tulsi and lemon balm and calendula. I'm gonna rotate to read this poem. So there's also a poem that was part of this exhibition. And I want to read it because I feel like it articulates a lot of the ideas more succinctly than I seem to be able to talk about them. So the poem is titled Medicine Kin. When we consume plant medicine, we are consumed. When we gather nettles by the stream, we are gathered. When we hold the earth in our hands, we are held, cradled by the ancestors in the soil, by all the beings that have given birth to us. Ingesting plant medicine is ingesting the body of the earth, your body, your mother's body, all the bodies you have yet to be. You're an eddy, a swirl in the river, a moment in time, each breath a practice of interbeing. Where deer gives birth to soil, gives birth to buckthorn, you are born. It is good to remember you will be ingested too. The earth will consume the medicine in your bone marrow. Your mind will feed maggots and mycelium. Our plant kin have been here a long time, long enough to know the contours of our skin, our blood, our organs, long enough to teach us how to heal. Medicine kin take root along highway ditches and empty lots, on heaps of construction rubble, healing the land where she needs it most. In dreaming up a garden full of food and medicines and well-tended earth, I am relearning conversations with spring and sandstone, coming back to the soil of my own body. And then another project I want to talk about briefly is a project I call the Wild Plant Cordage Project. And the reason I want to talk about this project is because it connects to the reasons that I wanted to do a residency at ReSource. So in dreaming up this project, I was thinking about how can I make art, create art without consuming anything, like as a first-hand consumer, without buying anything from the store, because this is something I struggle with in my art making a lot, just the fact that I have to buy things and package them and sell them and frame them, and like the printmaking ink is like pretty toxic and it gets washed down the drain, and I was like, I know that there are ways to create art that like don't involve like buying anything, and I wanted to see how that felt and investigate that. So I spent a year working with wild plant fibers. Here's stinging nettle again. So these are bast fibers that go along the outsides of the plant, and there's a whole process called retting. That's an old word for rot, and that gets the fibers ready to work with. And then I hand corded hundreds and hundreds of yards of cordage and worked with that to create some different sculptural pieces. And I was working with nets as a metaphor for a visual metaphor for ecological entanglement. I was thinking a lot about this Arne Ness quote. Arne Ness is the considered the founder of deep ecology. He writes about organisms as knots in the biospherical net of intrinsic relations, and I love that that idea of every organism as a knot. But this knot does not exist in isolation. It exists in connection with all of these other organisms within this web of life. So it was really rewarding to work with these plant fibers and to only work with materials that I harvested and I processed. And I felt like I really formed relationships with these plants and had like so much adoration and reverence for them. So this image and the last are basswood cordage. So basswood and nettles were the two plants that I worked with the most. I worked with milkweed and agave and lechugia and cottonwood and a couple others I can't remember. I corded dandelion stems, but these are the plants that I like most loved working with and that were most abundant to me living in Minnesota. So I make a lot of work, or at least a lot of writing about death. So here is an urn that I made, and you might notice the urn is full of holes. So the urn would not actually function to hold ashes, but you might put ashes in the urn, and they would like very quickly move out of that, move back into the body of the earth, which is something I think about a lot. Now we're going to look at pictures of deer. So when a lot of my work is about relationships with land and plants, and when I think about my foundation, like how I learned to relate to land, it really goes back to hunting with my dad in Minnesota, just like sitting quietly in the woods for hours and hours and hours. And that's like really those memories and that relationship. And I still go back and hunt. I'm going back in a couple weeks to hunt with my dad. It's just been so impactful to me to like have that quiet time. And also, I think it's very sacred to eat an animal that you harvest from a place that you feel really deeply connected to. So I have quite an archive of images from my dad's game cameras, like going back to 2014, and there's like hundreds of pictures from every year, and that's like after he's like picked his favorites. So I'm just showing a couple creepy ones. So you might see these silhouettes as motifs in my recent work, and I've been working with them in carving and sketching and natural dyeing, sort of trying to figure out what medium can best express this like deep felt reverence for this place, for these animals, and for this like driftless river valley that really supported and sustained me as like a growing human for most of my life. Someone asked me earlier if this was posed. It's not. Here's just so many incredible pictures. The deer are overabundant there. Like it's really becoming a detriment to other species because most of the predators have been taken out. So he'll have photos of like 6 different sets of deer fighting. That's an exaggeration. Maybe like 3 or 4 sets of deer fighting. And I just find them like really beautiful, and this composition is just like astounding. And this image is, stepping away from the microphone, the image that this piece is based off of. So this is my current work in progress during my residency here. So after I did that wild plant cordage project, I was like, this is great, I loved this, but the work really feels like, it doesn't quite fit with the rest of my practice. Like I learned a lot and I loved it, but I haven't made cordage since. Like I haven't carried it through in my practice. So coming to ReSource, I'm like, how can I make work that doesn't consume materials, at least consume them firsthand, but still feels more in line with the rest of my work. So I do a lot of relief carving for printing, as you saw in the Medicine Kin series. But now I'm thinking about relief carving as like the final project or the product. So these are all like old cabinet doors or cabinet fronts. Here's one that's unpainted. And Jesse showed these to me like on our first walkthrough, and I was like, oh, these are like ready-made frames. They're like really easy to carve because they're like, I don't know what they are, some kind of hardwood. And I have had a lot of material issues figuring this out. That's been a big part of my residency, but it's also been like a huge learning experience. So here's some tests, a little wild bergamot sketch, and then I first thought I wanted to do them in pine, but realized that pine is too stringy, and it just kind of like started flaking out, so retired that idea, and started using white just because of the ability to get that contrast. I'd imagined using color, but it's a lot harder to get the contrast, so I'm sticking with this creamy white for right now. And this was the first one, and you can't tell because I just like touched it up today, but it was like this huge smudgy mess that I like could not figure out how to resolve. It took me like, I spent like over a week trying to resolve the smudge. I was using some pencil that I thought was graphite, but now I think it's something else. I switched to charcoal, and I'm like wiping it all the time, so now I'm not getting this smudging. And it was a big learning experience. It was really humbling to just be like, to have all of my progress stopped by such a seemingly like easy thing to overcome. And I had an artist or a studio visit last week, and I was like, I'm gonna abandon them. I'm going back to relief printmaking because I know how to do it. And Kelly and Stoney were like, no, this is really like almost there. You should keep going with it. And I'm really glad they said that because like 2 days later, I figured it out. So I appreciate the affirmation. This piece. So this was the first one. This was really heavy. So this is the one that I'm like touching up currently. So the plants in these are wild bergamot and Japanese barberry and Queen Anne's lace and oak. And each deer has an introduced and a native species in it. So I didn't want to pit them against each other. And I'm still kind of unpacking the nuance of this, of what it means to pair these plants together in these deer that are sparring. But I just like, I've seen barberry drastically alter the landscape behind my parents' house. Like there are areas that we used to like go mushroom hunting and crawl around and make forts that we just like can't walk in anymore. Like it's like the fastest and most drastic landscape change I've seen. And it's really easy to be like, oh, this barberry, this plant is so horrible, so awful. So I'm wondering like, what does it mean to like have an attitude of like respect or like an attitude of openness of like, what can I learn from you? Like what are you doing here? What are you bringing to this space? I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to like remove non-natives in certain contexts. I just think that there's often an attitude of like antagonism or war or like eradication or like going back to this pristine environment like pre-contact, and not gonna happen in a globalized world. Like, we have like drastically changed the plant communities all over the globe, and they're gonna continue changing, and we have to learn how to like still hold reverence for these changed landscapes. Because if we can't cultivate reverence for the landscapes as they are now, it's going to be really hard to protect them going forward. We'll show another experiment. So I also brought in some natural dye stuff I'm working on. I tried making it, this is a little cedar waxwing, tiny carving, and I was trying to print this plate with mordant paste and then dye it. I haven't perfected this process yet, but it was a fun experiment, and now I have this fun little object, and Stoney asked me if this would ever be a final piece, and I don't know. Right now, no, but still exists as an artifact of my residency and my explorations here. One other thing that I want to show that I'm really excited about is this process of mordant paste, like painting, which is what you see behind me. So with natural dyeing, you have to mordant your fabric before you dye. That's like imbuing the fabric with usually like some kind of metallic salt, like alum, which is used in baking. And usually you immersion mordant, so you just like put it in a pot, heat it up, put your fabric in, take your fabric out, and then put it in the dye pot. But there's a way that you can paint on the mordant. So these are more that I'm working on based off my dad's game camera images. You might recognize this one with all of the deer, so lovely composed. So this is what it looks like. The pink is from beet juice, and that is a fugitive dye. So when I put that in hot water, that will go away, and the blue will go away, and then it will come out looking something like this, which I'm really, really excited about. And I brought a bunch of prints, more of my previous work, and then like I brought my tools because I feel like the home resource crowd is specifically a crowd that wants to know like, how is this made? What tools were used? What knives do you have? So I set them all out. They're these Japanese woodcut carving knives, and I like adore them. I like used my first stimulus check to buy them, and they're like my most favorite possession. Yeah, so feel free to check out the work. I feel like there was more I was going to say that now left my brain, so maybe if you have any questions, we'll stir up the other things I wanted to touch on.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Were you able to find any fabric here? Because I know that we get some weird stuff sometimes. Or does the fabric have to be like pretty I don't know the right word for that, but like fresh fabric?
No, so dyeing is actually better. So if you buy new fabric for dyeing, you have to scour it, which is like wash it in like hot water with like soda ash and soap, and it breaks down those like waxes and starches that they put in fabric. So like old, heavily used or heavily washed fabric is actually a lot easier to dye. So I'm trying. I haven't heard back yet, but I'm like emailing hotels around town to see if they'll give me their old sheets. Because that's like totally a waste stream that exists. Like after a sheet is like stained or ripped, they're not gonna keep using it, and I don't know where those go.
Missoula Textile Services.
They know?
They're the ones that
They have them.
They have them. They're the ones that are doing it all for all the hotels.
Oh, they get the old ones?
Well, they're the ones that clean them and they pull out the old ones as they go out. So,
Oh.
Missoula Textile, they'll have them.
Sunday night dumpster dive.
Yeah, that's great. I'm still new here, so I appreciate all the tips.
I was just going to say the reflection on struggling with the materials to get them to do what you want is, I think, experience that any of us that have tried to build stuff out of reused materials have come across, right? Like that's just like the act of dealing with reused materials is always a little bit, it's almost the fun sometimes when it's not frustrating, is that activity of saying, okay, I've got these things that we're using from something else, how am I going to turn it into something new? is just what you were saying about just resonated with me. A couple of different projects that I'm working on right now for myself.
You're running into some issues.
Yeah, I'm trying to make some bedside lamps, and getting everything to fit right it's a puzzle.
I guess I didn't answer your question. I did not find fabric here.
No fabric here.
No,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
there's still
I guess
time.
we don't really get too. Sometimes we get like shirts and stuff, but not really sheets.
We've got some like antique wool garments
Ooh.
that were very sneaky. It smelled like my grandmother's attic and my grandmother's basement.
I guess one thing I didn't say is that the white paint is house paint, so the paint is also from ReSource.
Yeah, I'm interested in the rope. That body of work with the rope making was fantastic and really interesting, and a kind of a contrast from the more illustrative work that you have kind of displayed here. This is like the embodiment of the concepts that you're working with, and there's an interesting strength to that. Is that still in your mind? Are you still, like, where does this sit inside of your kind of practice right now? Is it something you're still thinking about?
It's something I'm still thinking about, but not actively pursuing at the moment. It's sort of taking a break. I made a lot of cordage that year, and I was like ready to not make cordage anymore. It was like anytime I sat down at home, anytime I watched TV, anytime I was like sitting in the car and someone else was driving, I was cording. So maybe I just like did a little too much, but it's just so slow that I had to. But I had the opportunity to teach a bunch of people earlier this year when I was doing some work in California, and that felt really meaningful because I learned in California, I learned how to cord on a backpacking trip. So we like were out there and we were working with yucca fiber, and it just like felt so deeply meaningful to just like create right there, like with the plant, with what's readily available. So it definitely, yeah, this work has a specific resonance that feels really different from the rest of my work, and I'm not sure where it sits right now.
I'm
Yeah.
curious if you can speak to whether or not there's like an element of, I guess, spirituality in your work. When you mentioned the urn, and then when I saw you lay this cloth out in front of these pieces of these deer, it kind of struck me as like altar to these things. So I was curious if there's any element of spirituality, or at least like ritual.
Yeah, I think there is, and I think maybe I'm hesitant to talk about it sometimes. I mean, I'm happy to talk about that you asked, but I'm not gonna like. I feel like my presentation is already a little woo-woo sometimes. Some people, I don't know, but yeah, I mean, this way of thinking about land and relating to land is deeply spiritual, and like this work is like investigating that aspect of my spirituality. But I don't think I usually talk about it in such explicit terms. But there's some prints over there that came out of a weird poem about God. So that's and there's like references to heaven in them. But yeah, I like the question, thank you. And ritual, yeah, I guess that plays a big part in it too. I mean, dyeing feels like, there's aspects of my practice like relief cutting, and it's just so slow and precise. And then there's natural dyeing, which I'm just like throwing plants in a pot and then like seeing what happens. And there's like there's a lot of aspects of that you can't control. Or some people try to. I don't really try to. I mean, the pH of your water, the metal of your pot, like the time of day, not really, but it feels like it. You can just get like really weird results. And it does feel like kind of witchy, kind of ritual, that process of natural dyeing. Any other questions?
I just have a question about the metal cordage.
Yeah.
What part of, I don't know if I'm just not understanding how you like use the plant fibers to make the cord, but what part of the plant did you use? Because stinging metal is really painful if you like
Yeah.
touch the leaves and stuff. So I just like am curious how you work with it if you like got stung by it a lot, or like what
Yeah.
that kind of process is.
So harvesting them green like this, they sting a lot. And sometimes I wore gloves. But I also kind of got used to it. A lot of herbalists will actually use the sting medicinally too as a way to like draw your body's like healing energy to an area if you have like inflammation. That's not necessarily how I was using it, but so they have these single cellular like needles on the bottoms of the leaves and the stalk, but they're pretty brittle. So once the plant's dry, like 90% of those just like fall off. And then the retting process, which is like intentionally rotting the plant, further gets rid of those. So by the time I'm actually working with it, it's like pretty rare that I get stung. But the fiber is, so there's the stalk of the plant, and then there's the bast fiber. BAST is a word that refers to fibers that are in like the cambium layer, kind of the outside of the plant. And then there's like kind of a bark, so you have to rot the bark off, and then you have to peel the bast fiber off. So like hemp is also bast fiber, flax is bast fiber, basswood is bast fiber, I guess. So yeah, there's like industrial processes for working with these for flax. Nettles actually has like quite a history within textiles. Because they're so abundant and they grow so tall and they have such strong, durable fibers. They've been used industrial before, not so much right now, but an interesting fun fact about nettle fibers is that a lot of Nazi uniforms were actually made out of nettle fibers because Germany was cut off from a lot of global supply chains, so that their like textile industry turned to using nettles. And those garments have held up like way better than like cotton garments from other like of the time period. Were you gonna say something?
I just wanted to draw attention to your bouquet, your
Oh, yes.
instrument, and ask where they came from.
So I work at County Rail / Field 5 Flowers, and I picked these there and arranged them, and I love arranging flowers. It just brings me so much joy, and it feels like this synthesis of art and agriculture that is just like such a close like mesh, and it feels really good, and I'm really excited to work more with Bethany at Field 5 Flowers next year, and get more into design. And
Okay, one more question for me. So I'm looking at these newer pieces, and you have they feel more graphic, and it seems like you're kind of going out on a limb and exploring composition, and maybe that mirrors what's happening here, where you have the dyed pieces as well. But in some of these other works that you have displayed, the circle up on the side, for those who haven't seen, there's some lovely woodcuts that are over here. Right, Carol? Are they all woodcuts?
There's a mix. That's a woodcut. Those are all lino cuts.
Thank you. Okay, so
Yeah.
there's some beautiful prints that are up here on the right hand side, but there's kind of more environmental, like object,
Yeah.
environment, or kind of melding. Can you share what you're like discovering in this process, or are you? Is it what's all that about?
I don't know. I've noticed it, and I noticed that quality about this work, but I don't necessarily know where it comes from. Maybe I'll have a better answer like a year from now. I don't know. These like sketches kind of just like arrived in my brain in this like graphic quality, and I sort of just like kept working with that. But yeah, I think I need to like do some more thinking and figure out like what the significance is of that. Yeah.
Right, follow up. Those sketches, I couldn't tell, but it didn't really look like it was plants within.
Yeah, they are.
Oh, okay.
They're just like,
Yeah, I just was curious.
this is just like ferns and like goldenrod. I just picked like easier,
Okay.
less
Yeah.
intricate plants.
I guess I was just curious, like if when you were thinking about portraying the deer, if you always like planned to pair the plants within them, or how that kind of came about.
There are more living in my head that have other elements. Like I really want to do one with like a human skeletal like form, like kind of like scrunched up in the deer. But I haven't made that yet. Yeah.
I am curious about using fabric, like as opposed to I'm also a printmaker and I really love to use fabric, and I'm always curious about fabric as like the as instead of paper as the surface. And
Yeah. Do you print on fabric too?
yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I just love working with fabric, and I love sewing, and I love natural dyeing. And I don't know. There's just like a different quality to the way the print can move. And I mean, I frame them usually so they're like stretched pretty taut, but they still like retain a distinct like characteristic that is fabric and not paper. But I think it's just my love of textile processes and the love of printmaking and sort of meshing those together.
One last thing to say. I don't have a question, but I just want to really admire. When you were talking about being less into, like, I guess choosing better rhetoric when talking about non-native species. I love that you chose deer too, because they have a similar kind of warlike quality that I've heard from fellow gardeners and neighbors alike. Like, they're the pests of my garden, they eat all my flowers. And so I just love that that is the animal that you chose to do all of
Yeah,
this.
because they are native. They've been on this continent for a long time, but just the way that settlers have changed the continent has also like really changed their behavior. And there are so many more deer than there used to be because their populations aren't in check. So they're like, and that's really to the detriment of people's gardens and like certain like native plants. And that's
deer.
And deer, yeah. I mean, chronic wasting disease is in my hometown and here in Montana now. And thank you, Open Air, for giving me this opportunity. I'm really, really grateful for it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.